3 years, 36 months, 1,095 days of sharing a penthouse with a man who treated me like expensive furniture, beautiful, untouchable, part of the decor. Then I smiled at someone else, and suddenly Min remembered I could bleed. By every calculation, their marriage was a masterpiece. They arrived in sync, departed with his hand steady at the small of her back, sat close enough at charity dinners that photographers captured what looked like whispered intimacies. His touch in public was warm, possessive, the kind that made people assume passion existed easily between them. The gesture was practiced enough to seem instinctive. To the world, it looked like devotion. To Janice, it felt like choreography rehearsed by strangers. 36 months married, and the man who held her for cameras had never once touched her behind closed doors. Not once. The divide between their public performance and private silence had grown so absolute it felt architectural, like he'd drawn a line through their penthouse that neither could cross without consequences. She stood in the master bedroom, theirs in name only, watching Chicago bleed neon through floor-to-ceiling windows. The city below pulsed with life, messy and loud and real. Up here, everything was controlled, sterile, blue-toned and suffocating. Behind her, the door whispered open. "You're still awake," Min said. His voice always entered a room before the rest of him. Low, precise, the kind of sound that made people lean in or step back, depending on how well they knew him. "So are you?" Janice replied without turning. Silence settled between them, heavy and familiar as gravity. When she finally faced him, she saw what the rest of Chicago feared and craved in equal measure. Min was all dark eyes and sharper edges, ink-black hair falling just past his collar, tattoos creeping up his neck like secrets he wore openly. His suit was immaculate, tailored to emphasize broad shoulders and controlled power. Beautiful in a way that felt dangerous, like staring too long at an eclipse. "You have the museum opening tomorrow," he said. "We leave at 7, always we in public." Janice nodded slowly. "Do you ever get tired of pretending?" A pause. Brief, but real. Pretending what? That we sleep in the same bed. His gaze shifted, just for half a second. That was all the confirmation she'd ever needed. Min had built his empire on knowing exactly where every boundary lived. Power demanded distance, control demanded discipline, and whatever this marriage was, strategic alliance, business merger, gilded cage, it demanded performance. So he played the devoted husband flawlessly when eyes were watching. He touched her when the cameras demanded it, held her when their reputation required it, let the world believe what it wanted to believe. In private, he kept his hands to himself. Private touch wasn't performance. Private touch was truth, and truth was the one thing Min couldn't afford. But 3 years of silence had taught Janice something Min hadn't anticipated: how to turn absence into strategy. Tonight, standing in the cold blue light of their separate lives, she made a decision that would shatter the glass between them forever. The penthouse smelled like money and loneliness, sandalwood from Min's cologne, mixing with the sterile scent of marble that never warmed, no matter how long you touched it. Janice had memorized every corner of this place, every cold surface, every echo of her own footsteps in rooms too large for one person pretending not to exist. She moved through the space like a woman learning to haunt her own life in reverse. Her silk robe whispered against her brown skin as she walked, the fabric clinging to curves Min had looked past for 1,095 days. Her hair fell in a sleek ponytail down her back, each strand perfectly aligned because control was the only currency she had left. In Min's study, the one room she'd been told was off limits without him ever actually saying the words. A single lamp burned. She shouldn't be here. That was the point. His desk was obsessively organized, pens aligned, papers stacked with military precision. And there, half hidden, beneath a contract written in Korean, a leather-bound journal. Janice's fingers trembled as she opened it. The handwriting was Min's, sharp, controlled, intimate in a way his voice had never been with her. Month 1, day 1. She unpacked her things today, didn't ask where I'd be sleeping. Smart woman, dangerous woman. Month 6, day 14. She wore red to the fundraiser. Doesn't she know red is a confession? Month 12, day 7. Caught her crying in the shower. The water couldn't drown out the sound. I stood outside the door for 20 minutes. Pathetic. Month 36, day 1. Today, 11:14 p.m. She's looking at the moon. She looks tired of me. The journal slipped from her hands, pages fluttering like broken wings. He'd been writing about her, watching her, documenting her loneliness like a scientist studying something he'd caged but refused to touch. The lamp's glow made her skin look golden against the darkness pressing against the windows. Chicago stretched below, indifferent to the woman discovering she'd been performing for an audience of one. Find what you were looking for? Min's voice came from the doorway, low and sharp enough to cut. Janice didn't turn around, couldn't. Her pulse hammered against her throat, visible, vulnerable, a tell she couldn't hide. How long have you been standing there? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. How long have you been reading my private thoughts? She faced him then. Min leaned against the doorframe, jacket discarded. Shirt unbuttoned, just enough to show the edge of ink decorating his collarbone. He looked tired, dangerous, like a man who'd stopped pretending he wasn't capable of burning the world down. Private, Janice repeated, tasting the word like poison. That's rich coming from you. She moved toward the wall, fingers finding the small imperfection she'd discovered weeks ago, a tiny lens embedded in the crown molding, so subtle you'd miss it unless you were looking, unless you'd spent 3 years memorizing every inch of your prison. The cameras, she said softly, they're not connected to building security, are they? Min's jaw tightened. The only crack in his armor. They're connected to this room, to your desk, to the monitors, I'm guessing, are hidden in that cabinet you'd never let anyone touch. Her laugh came out broken. You didn't abandon me, Min. You've been watching me this entire time. The silence between them turned serrated. For your protection, he said finally. From who? Your enemies or yourself? He moved then, closing the distance between them in 3 strides. Min stopped just short of touching her, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off his body, smell the whiskey on his breath mixed with that damned sandalwood that haunted every room she tried to claim as her own. You want to know the truth? His voice dropped lower, intimate and cruel. I watched you because staying away was killing me, because every night I didn't touch you felt like discipline, and every morning I woke up knowing you were 20 feet away felt like punishment. Janice's breath caught. Then why? Because the day I marry someone, the day I claim them as mine in every way that matters, is the day I paint a target on their back so bright my enemies could see it from orbit. His hand lifted, hovering near her face but not quite touching. 3 years, Janice. 3 years of keeping you safe by keeping you separate. You kept me lonely, she whispered. There's a difference. His almost touch dropped. I know. Morning came wrapped in fog, the kind that made Chicago look like a city drowning in its own secret. Janice stood in front of her closet, choosing armor, a cream silk blouse, tailored black pants that made her legs look endless, gold hoops that caught light when she moved her head. Today, she had a meeting at a scent gallery. Today, she stopped being Mrs. Min in name only and became Janice again. The woman with an art history degree she'd buried under 3 years of playing invisible. Julian Reeves waited for her in his gallery, all charm and calculated warmth. He was handsome in an accessible way, Brown skin a shade darker than hers, smile easy, eyes that crinkled when he laughed. Nothing like Min's glacial beauty. "You're exactly on time," Julian said, extending his hand. "I appreciate that." His palm was warm against hers. Steady, normal. "I appreciate the opportunity," Janice replied. They walked through the gallery, discussing acquisitions and exhibition schedules. Julian's enthusiasm was infectious, his passion for art genuine. He touched her elbow twice, once to guide her toward a painting, once to emphasize a point about negative space. Both times Janice felt eyes on her that had nothing to do with Julian. She glanced toward the gallery windows. Across the street, a black sedan idled, tinted windows, engine running, the kind of car that screamed money and menace in equal measure. "Everything all right?" Julian asked. Janice smiled. "Fine. Just thought I saw someone I knew." But when she looked again, the sedan was gone. That night, Min was waiting in the penthouse when she returned, not in his study, not in the neutral zones they'd established through 3 years of careful avoidance, in her wing, in her space. He sat in the chair by her window, backlit by city lights, looking like something carved from shadow and expensive regret. "Julian Reeves," Min said without preamble, "art consultant, gallery owner, federal agent." The words landed like bullets. "You're lying." Min pulled out his phone, swiped once, and turned the screen toward her. A dossier. Julian's face, his real credentials, FBI, Organized Crime Division, current assignment, infiltrate and dismantle the Min shipping empire. "I've known since the day you met him," Min said quietly. "I let it happen. I wanted to see if you'd betray me." Janice's hands curled into fists. "And? What's your conclusion?" He stood, moving toward her with that predatory grace that made her skin prickle with fear and something far more dangerous. "My conclusion," Min whispered, close enough now that his breath ghosted across her temple, "is that you're smarter than I gave you credit for. And more dangerous." The box arrived the next morning. Midnight blue velvet, tied with silver ribbon. No card, no explanation, just the box sitting on Janice's vanity like a confession. Inside a necklace, diamonds arranged in a constellation pattern, delicate and devastating. The kind of jewelry that marked you as owned. Janice lifted it from the velvet, watching light fracture through each stone. Beautiful, flawless, and wrong. She held it up to the lamp, angling the centerpiece diamond just right. There, barely visible unless you knew to look, a hairline seam. The stone was hollow. Technical. A transmitter disguised as a gift. A laugh bubbled up from somewhere dark in her chest. 3 years of surveillance, and now Min wanted her to wear his obsession around her neck, wanted her to carry his paranoia like jewelry. "Do you like it?" His voice came from the doorway. Again. Always appearing like smoke, like he'd learned to move through walls. Janice met his gaze in the mirror. Min stood perfectly still, but his eyes, God, his eyes were molten. Desperate. The look of a man who'd spent 3 years starving himself and had finally decided hunger was a choice he didn't have to keep making. "It's beautiful," she said carefully. "What's the occasion? Does obsession need an occasion?" The honesty of it stole her breath. No pretense, no performance. Just the raw admission that he'd been watching her, wanting her, denying himself her for reasons that made sense to him alone. She fastened the necklace around her throat, feeling the weight of diamonds and surveillance settle against her collarbone. In the mirror, they looked like what they'd always been, a beautiful lie wrapped around an ugly truth. "There," Janice said softly. "Now you can hear every word I say, every breath I take. Does that make you feel safer, Min, or just more alone?" He crossed the room in seconds, his hand catching her wrist. The first time he'd truly touched her in 1,095 days. His grip wasn't gentle. It was possession finally acknowledged. You think this is about safety? His voice had gone rough, each word scraped raw. You think I gave you that necklace to protect you? Then why? His other hand rose, fingers ghosting along her jawline, tilting her face toward his. The touch was reverent and ruinous, 3 years of restraint cracking with each passing second. Because I need to know you're real, Min whispered against her temple. Because I've watched you through screens for so long, I've forgotten what you feel like. Warm. Alive. Mine. Janice's pulse thundered beneath his touch. I was never yours. You made sure of that. I know. His forehead dropped to hers, and for a moment they breathed the same air. So let me correct that mistake. Janice should have pulled away, should have reminded him that 3 years of calculated distance couldn't be erased with one touch, one admission, one moment of weakness disguised as strength. Instead, she smiled. Not the polite smile she'd perfected for cameras, not the empty curve of lips she'd worn like armor at 1,000 charity dinners. This smile was sharp enough to draw blood. You want to correct your mistake? She turned in his grip, forcing him to either release her or hold her properly. He chose the latter, his hand sliding from her wrist to the small of her back, the same touch he'd performed in public, now stripped of pretense. Then you should know something, Min. His eyes narrowed. Predator recognizing prey that had learned to bite back. I found your cameras in month 6. The confession landed like a blade between ribs. Min went perfectly still, the kind of stillness that preceded either violence or revelation. Every lonely dinner I ate alone, Janice continued, her voice soft as silk and twice as dangerous. Every night I stood at this window looking like I was mourning you. I knew you were watching. I knew you were in your study, staring at screens, convincing yourself that distance was discipline. His grip on her tightened. You're lying? Am I? She reached up, fingers trailing along the edge of his jaw, where tension had turned muscle to stone. Month 8, day 12. I wore that red dress you mentioned in your journal, the one you said was a confession. I wore it because I wanted to see how long you could watch me without breaking. Min's breath came harder now. Each inhale a visible struggle for the control that had defined him for 3 years. Month 15, Janice whispered, close enough now that her lips almost brushed his. I cried in the shower. You wrote about it. Wrote about standing outside the door like some kind of martyr. But what you didn't write was that I left the door unlocked. I wanted you to come in. Wanted you to be human for once, instead of whatever ice sculpture of a husband you'd decided to become. Janice! Month 34, I brought books about art authentication into the living room, left them open where you'd see them on your cameras. I knew you'd investigate, knew you'd discover Julian. I wanted you to feel what I'd felt, watching someone else have access to the person you'd thrown away. The truth hung between them, sharp and glittering. You played me, Min said, and there was something like admiration in his voice beneath the fury. For 2.5 years, you played me. I learned from the best. Janice's smile widened. The hunter became the prey, Min. How does it feel? His hand came up to her throat, not choking, just resting there above the diamond necklace he'd given her. His thumb pressed against her pulse, feeling how her heart raced despite her composed exterior. It feels, he said slowly, each word deliberate, like I've finally met my match. The glass shattered before Janice heard the gunshot. One of the penthouse windows exploded inward, safety glass fragmenting into 1,000 glittering pieces. Min moved on instinct, his body covering hers, driving them both to the floor as a second bullet punched through where her head had been seconds before. They landed hard, Min's weight pressing her into the marble, his hand cradling her skull to prevent impact. For a moment, there was only breathing, his harsh against her neck, hers rapid and shallow against his chest. "Stay down," he ordered. Already reaching for the weapon Janice had always suspected he kept, within arm's reach of every room he occupied. But the third shot didn't come. Instead, a voice drifted through the broken window, accented and amused. "If I wanted her dead, Min, she would be decorating your expensive floor. May I come in, or shall we continue this conversation with you playing hero?" Min's jaw clenched hard enough to crack teeth, but he helped Janice to her feet, keeping his body between her and the window. Petrov, the very same. The man who climbed through the shattered window moved like violence in a tailored suit.
He was broad where Min was lean, scarred where Min was ink, but they shared the same predatory grace, the same eyes that had seen too much and decided mercy was a luxury they couldn't afford. Petrov's gaze found Janice, assessment cold and clinical. "You must be the wife, the ghost, the woman. Chicago's most dangerous man keeps locked in a tower." "I'm not locked," Janice said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "I'm just expensive." Petrov laughed, genuine and startling. "I like her, Min. She has teeth. What do you want?" Min's gun remained trained on Petrov's center mass, finger resting beside the trigger, with the kind of familiarity that said he'd pulled it before and wouldn't hesitate to do it again. "To give your wife something you've denied her." Petrov pulled a phone from his pocket, slowly, telegraphing every movement. "The truth." He slid it across the floor. It stopped at Janice's feet. Min stepped forward, but Janice was faster. She picked up the phone, swiped it open. Bank statements, wire transfers, dates going back 3 years, payments to names she recognized, her sister, her father, her aunt, who'd raised her after her mother died. Millions, paid in carefully structured increments designed to look like legitimate business income. "What is this?" Janice's voice came out hollow. "Your husband's insurance policy," Petrov explained, his tone almost gentle. "He didn't just watch you for 3 years, Mrs. Min. He bought your isolation, paid your family to stay away. Your sister's job opportunity in Singapore? Min's doing? Your father's sudden ability to afford that house in Arizona? Min's money, every person who could have given you an escape. A support system, a reason to leave, he bought their distance." The phone slipped from Janice's fingers. She turned to Min slowly, each movement feeling underwater. "Tell me he's lying." Min's silence was confirmation enough. "I did what was necessary," he said finally, each word stripped of everything except brutal honesty. "Your family made you vulnerable. Every connection you had was a weakness someone could exploit. I gave them better lives in exchange for giving me the only thing I needed, your complete dependence." "My prison," Janice corrected, her voice breaking on the word. "You built my prison and made sure there was nowhere to run. Yes, no apology, no excuse, just admission." Petrov moved toward the window. "The phone is yours to keep, Mrs. Min, as is the information on it. Consider it a gift from one prisoner to another. I know what it's like to be owned by powerful men. The difference is I learned to bite back." He disappeared through the broken window, leaving behind shattered glass and more devastating truths. Janice walked to Min's study like a woman walking to her own execution, or his. She found the surveillance monitors exactly where she'd suspected, hidden behind a false wall in the mahogany cabinet. 12 screens, 12 angles, 12 different views of the life she thought she'd been living in private. Her bedroom, the kitchen, the bathroom where she'd cried in month 15. Every corner of her carefully constructed loneliness broadcast in high definition to the man who'd claimed he was keeping her safe. She picked up the first thing her hand found, a crystal decanter, heavy and expensive. And the first monitor shattered with a satisfying crack. The second exploded in a shower of sparks. Janice, Min's voice behind her, always watching. 3 years, she said, not turning, destroying a third screen. 3 years of pretending to be alone while you watched me like I was a specimen in a jar. I was protecting you. You were controlling me. Fourth screen, fifth. There's a difference. He crossed the room in seconds, catching her wrist before she could destroy the sixth monitor. His grip was iron, but his eyes, God, his eyes were chaos, barely contained. You want the truth? Min's voice had gone rough, each word scraped raw. Fine. I watched you because every camera was a reminder that you were real, that you were mine, that I hadn't just dreamed you up as some kind of cosmic punishment for every terrible thing I've done. I'm not yours, Janice snarled, trying to wrench free. You bought my isolation and called it love. You imprisoned me and called it protection. I know, he didn't release her. But that doesn't change what I feel. And what do you feel, Min? Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like obsession wearing a wedding ring. He pulled her closer, his other hand coming up to frame her face, forcing her to meet his gaze. It is obsession. It's 3 years of wanting something I convinced myself I couldn't have. It's watching you exist 20 feet away and knowing that if I touched you, if I claimed you the way every cell in my body demanded, I'd make you a target.
It's waking up every morning and choosing discipline over desire and hating myself for it. Janice's breath came in sharp bursts. Then why now? Why break 3 years of control? Because you were right. His forehead dropped to hers, and suddenly they were breathing the same air again, their hearts racing in a rhythm that had nothing to do with fear. I'd rather burn with you than freeze without you. The kiss, when it came, wasn't gentle. It was 3 years of starvation finally fed, 3 years of careful distance incinerated in the space between one breath and the next. Min's mouth on hers was claiming, consuming, a confession written in the language of touch. He denied them both. Janice should have pushed him away, should have remembered that desire wasn't the same as trust, that heat wasn't the same as healing. Instead,
she kissed him back like she was trying to burn the world down. His hand slid into her hair, destroying the perfect ponytail she'd worn like armor. Her fingers found the buttons of his shirt, undoing them with the kind of urgency that had been building for 1,095 days. They didn't make it to a bed, didn't make it past the desk where he'd kept his journals, his surveillance, his obsessive documentation of a woman he'd refused to touch. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the study looked like a hurricane had torn through it. Shattered monitors, scattered papers, the careful order of Min's controlled world reduced to beautiful chaos. This doesn't fix anything, Janice whispered against his mouth. I know. His hands traced the curve of her spine, learning the territory he'd only ever witnessed through screens. But it's a start. The federal agents came at dawn. Julian led them, his gallery owner charm replaced by the cold efficiency of a man who'd been playing a role and was finally done performing. He had a warrant. He had evidence. He had everything he needed to dismantle Min's empire brick by carefully laundered brick. Except the one thing he'd actually come for. "Where's Janice?" Julian demanded, his weapon trained on Min with the kind of steady hands that said he'd done this before. Min stood in the center of the penthouse living room, hands visible, face calm. "She's not here. Don't lie to me." Julian moved closer. "I know what you are. I know what you've done. And I know she's been trapped in this place for 3 years, isolated and controlled. I'm giving her a way out."
Are you? A new voice, soft and dangerous. Janice emerged from the hallway, dressed in black silk that made her brown skin luminous in the early light. She looked like money and menace and power claimed rather than given. The diamonds at her throat caught the sun, Min's surveillance, his obsession, his confession, worn like a crown. Janice. Julian's weapon lowered slightly. You don't have to protect him. Whatever he's told you, whatever he's done to make you think you're safe with him. I know exactly what he's done, Janice interrupted. I've known for 2.5 years. The cameras, the isolation, the systematic elimination of everyone in my life who could have given me an exit route. Julian's expression shifted to something like hope. Then come with me. Witness protection, a new identity. Freedom from all of this. Freedom.
Janice tested the word, tasting it like wine that might be poisoned. You're offering me freedom in exchange for testimony that destroys the man I just spent 3 years learning to outmaneuver. He's a criminal, Janice? So am I. The confession hung in the air, sharp and glittering. Min turned slowly, and for the first time since Janice had known him, she saw genuine surprise on his face. 7 years ago, Janice continued, her voice steady despite the earthquake she was creating, I was working as a junior accountant for a firm that laundered money for organizations significantly worse than Min's. There was an audit. A federal agent got too close. There was an accident. Julian's weapon came back up. What kind of accident? The kind that looks like a car went off a bridge in bad weather. The kind that closed an investigation before it could reach the people who paid my salary. She looked at Min then, something raw and real passing between them. The statute of limitations on involuntary manslaughter is 3 years in Illinois. It expired at midnight. Understanding crashed over Julian's features. He knew. This whole time he knew what you'd done. More than knew, Min said quietly. I made sure the evidence that could have connected her to that night disappeared. Made sure no one looked too closely at a junior accountant who'd suddenly moved across the country. Made sure that when I married her 3 years ago, I was marrying someone who had exactly 36 months until she was free. And the isolation. Julian's voice had gone hoarse. The surveillance? I was making sure she stayed alive long enough to reach that expiration date, Janice answered. The men I used to work for don't like loose ends. Min kept me locked in this penthouse because the moment I stepped outside his protection, I was a target. She moved to stand beside Min, close enough that their arms touched. Not behind him, not in front of him, beside him. So here's what's going to happen, Janice said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from surviving 3 years of isolation and coming out sharper. You're going to take your warrant and your federal investigation, and you're going to leave because the woman you came to rescue doesn't exist. She never did. Julian looked between them, the Mafia boss who'd isolated his wife to save her, and the wife who'd learned to turn obsession into power. You're choosing him,
Julian said, not quite a question. I'm choosing me, Janice corrected. He just happens to be useful. The federal agents left. The penthouse settled back into silence. Min and Janice stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the sun finish rising over Chicago. The statute expired, Min said finally. You're free now. Legally, financially, you could walk away from all of this. I could, Janice agreed. But where's the fun in that? She turned to face him, the diamonds at her throat catching light. You spent 3 years watching me, teaching me how power works, showing me that control is just another performance, and the person who recognizes the performance first wins the game. Her hand came up to trace the line of his jaw, the touch possessive in a way that made his breath catch. So here's the new rule, Janice whispered. You don't get to watch me anymore. You don't get to document my life like I'm a project to be managed. From now on, if you want to know what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, what I'm planning, you ask, like I'm a person, like I'm your equal, like I'm dangerous enough to destroy you. Min's smile was slow. Dangerous? Genuinely amused. And if I don't agree to your terms, then I take everything I learned watching you watch me, and I build my own empire. one that makes yours look small. He pulled her close, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that tasted like new beginnings built on old obsessions. "Welcome to the game, wife," Min murmured against her lips. "I've been waiting 3 years for you to show up." They stood together in the wreckage of their carefully constructed distance.
Two people who'd learned that sometimes love looked like surveillance. Freedom looked like choosing your cage, and power looked like a woman in diamonds teaching her husband that he'd never owned her. She'd just been waiting for the statute to expire. Chicago spread below them, bright and brutal and beautiful, a kingdom waiting to be claimed by a queen who'd built her throne in the dark. So Janice didn't need rescuing after all. She needed a statute of limitations and a husband twisted enough to play the long game with her. If this story of obsession, strategy, and two people too dangerous to love normally has you hooked, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. Because trust me, this is just the beginning of the Obsidian Dynasty, and what